Hi, my name's Ellie. Thanks for joining me today. Okay, let's be really honest with ourselves. Most of us close our hearts in order to protect ourselves. It's not a sign of weakness, it's actually instinct. So maybe it happens after we've had a sense of betrayal by someone, or maybe it's happened because we're in a world where emotional safety isn't guaranteed. Or maybe it's just the daily exhaustion of seeing too many things, seeing too much negativity, too much division, too much drama, too much bad news. You build walls because you're tired and you just want to stop hurting, and it's kind of like a barrier against pain. But over time, those walls that you create, they do more than just keep pain out. They keep everything out. Joy, connection, creativity, even your own clarity sometimes. When your heart is closed, life starts to feel a bit muted. You might crave deep relationships, but they feel distant and disconnected and far away. You lose touch with your emotions. So, or you may end up feeling too many emotions as well because they're all banked up and come out all at once. And you may not even be able to understand your emotions sometimes. Why is it that suddenly I'm crying and I don't know why, when everything's been fine for such a long time? You might start overanalyzing everything, second guessing yourself, or getting stuck in a loop of kind of response to things that is becoming very almost defeated. You may begin to withdraw from people and then wonder how come you feel alone. And then you start to doubt your own instincts, even when it comes to very simple decision making. All of these things can come as a result of closing your heart. It's all fear. Fear of being hurt again, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged or rejected or invaded or exposed. When fear is in charge, the heart doesn't just hide away, it kind of separates from reality. And you don't just pull back from the problem, you pull back from the possibility of the solution as well. This video is all about opening your heart without getting hurt. Well, we need to pause. We need to ask ourselves, what are you actually protecting yourself from? Because until you see it clearly, you're going to keep building walls without meaning to do so. So we've talked about how fear makes us close our hearts, but here's a real kicker, right? Most people don't even realize that they're afraid. The world teaches us to stay strong, yeah? Which often really just means disconnected, especially now with constant news cycles that trigger anxiety, online outrage that feeds tribalism, and echo chambers that are reinforcing the whole us versus them othering. Yeah, it's easy to fall into a pattern of emotional shutdown. Fear doesn't always arrive in a loud and proud and obvious way though. Sometimes it whispers and it's really hard to detect. Sometimes it even wears a disguise. So fear can appear like sarcasm, perfectionism, detachment, or control. And often it shows up in tiny moments, long before you even notice that your heart has closed down. Just like that awful saying that we often hear these days about the boiling frog. Yeah, I really don't like that saying. Something like fear can creep up behind us so slowly and incrementally that we don't even notice it until we're alone and lonely and feeling isolated. And it's not because anyone here is a bad person, right? Or unlovable. It's because feelings of fear or vulnerability are present. So let's see how we can shift this, right? Reverse it, avoid it, build something stronger and more empowered, a kind of open love that is filled with compassion and empathy, but also strongly grounded in emotional self-awareness and self-protection. Because the whole point is to feel love without getting hurt. So it's important to know the difference. Grounded, self-aware love versus unconditional love. They're two very different things. Unconditional love, right, sounds beautiful, but unconditional love is when you make yourself vulnerable by abandoning your own spiritual needs. Grounded, self-aware love, however, that allows you to move forward, feeling compassion and empathy towards others, but without having to abandon your own spiritual self. There's also this concept of triggering sometimes. And so in order to love without being hurt, sometimes we need to rewire our mind and seeing beyond that trigger. So when we're emotionally triggered, the mind kicks into autopilot. Thoughts begin to race, reactions flare, and suddenly everything feels very, very personal. Yeah, we might lash out or shut down or begin to spiral without stopping to ask, is this real or is this just a familiar thing that's happened to me before and I'm kind of projecting it onto the moment? Because here's the thing, right? When we've been hurt before, our brain tries to protect us by anticipating when it might happen again and spotting similar types of patterns. But our brain often gets it wrong. So it treats the present like it's the past, even when the threat isn't the same. It's not your fault, and that's what trauma does. Trauma warps the ability to anticipate the future threat. It drains the mind and predicts pain where pain may never actually come, just so that it can kind of build up its defenses and attack it before it gets attacked. And it even sometimes targets the current situation that doesn't deserve any kind of reaction. So in today's media landscape, that kind of triggering response or triggering situation is constant. The doom scrolling, sensationalist headlines, aggressive debates, they all poke at old wounds and reinforce the idea that we're under threat. And without checking in with ourselves, we end up reacting as though every disagreement is dangerous. Every differing opinion is personal. So what should we do? Okay, so when there is a trigger coming on, the very first thing that helps us is to just give it some space. Time is always your best friend. Space between the triggering thought and your response to it. Inside that space is the truth. So space gives you a chance to find the truth inside you. All of the answers that you need as you're transitioning into 5D is inside you. Everything is inside you. Yeah? So if you give yourself a moment to find what's inside you, that inner truth will reveal itself. Right? So here's a really practical example. You're with a friend or a relative and you're listening to them speak, or someone at work, or even perhaps listening to someone in social media or on television or radio or whatever. Suddenly, whoever it is that you're listening to says something that you disagree with, and it kind of triggers a past trauma from your past. And you can feel an emotional flare coming up, and the very first thing you want to do is argue with it, right? You might be feeling physical symptoms like your mind is racing, how dare they? Or your chest is getting tight, the usual kind of low-level, immediate, anxious response. And you get this sudden urge to argue or shut down, right? So these are all clues that might appear that you can identify. The best thing to do is just stop and breathe. And then ask yourself, what is the story that I'm telling myself? What am I telling myself right now about this moment? Is it something like, oh, I'm under attack, this has become personal, I'm under attack. Or this person is just like everyone else. Or I can't trust them. Something like that. Are these the things that I'm telling myself? Now you have space. Once you've identified how you feel, is it that you feel that you're under attack, for example? Once you have that space and you spend a moment kind of identifying what it is that your trigger has raised, then you can start challenging that story that you've told yourself. It might be right, but you won't know until you challenge it. So test it to see if it really is just a story or whether it might actually be fact. So you might ask yourself, am I really under attack? What else could be true? Am I missing something? Am I being a bit overly protective of myself? Does it sound like something familiar to me, like I've heard it before from some other place and time? And did it hurt me back then? And maybe is that what I'm responding to? Am I beginning to shut down, for example? And if I am shutting down, is it because I'm afraid of this person right now? Am I fearful of what they're saying? or is it something else? You see, try to understand, what is it that has caused this trigger response? What is it that you're feeling, and why are you feeling it really? Rather than getting defensive, get really curious about this. Ask questions. Look for nuances that will help you to understand, or keep listening to see if perhaps it all begins to make sense as the opinion unfolds, for example, or the statement unfolds. Because you might find that when you've got the full context of what's been said, you realize, oh, actually it had nothing to do with me, and this is the same person I thought they always were. They've had an experience that has led them to say and to perceive what they are saying to be the way that it is. And that way, what you're doing is you're not betraying your instincts. In fact, what you're doing is you're allowing yourself a little bit of space to help fine-tune your instincts. Because once you begin to examine why you feel triggered by something or someone in this way, you begin to see the difference between your past trauma and the triggers that have arisen from there, and genuine, real red flags that are appearing in the here and now. Because, a red flag is something real. That is something that is dangerous, and you should probably just get rid of that person or that kind of influence from your life. But if you are responding to a past trigger, then you may have a perfectly wonderful, empowering individual that is worthy of your love right there in front of you. And you mustn't allow your past trauma to diminish the value that you could get from continuing to love that person. Can you see? So let's take it a step further. Let's look at this reopening of your emotion, reopening of the love, but without losing yourself in the process, because that's really important too. You don't have to believe in things like energy work. I mean, there's a lot of woo-woo that happens around here. And so, there's things like chakras and other energy work terminology. I'm not going to use that today. I'm actually going to keep it really basic. But it's really relatively easy to know your emotional center and when it's shut down, because you may start to feel those physical symptoms, and your breath might start to get shallow, and then your mind might start to tense up and start racing, and maybe you kind of have even gotten to the point where you've stopped caring, or you've stopped feeling very much at all. You've started to become numb. This is not weakness, okay? These are signs of overload. And reopening emotionally doesn't mean tearing down your boundaries or letting people walk all over you. It means giving yourself a safe, conscious way back to connection. So practical ways to do that. Start with your body, right? Tension in the chest or the jaw or the shoulders can signal emotional shutdown when you get really tight. Try stretching or walking or just breathing deeper, for real. So inhale and exhale. That often helps all by itself. This kind of giving yourself a chance for your nervous system to kind of recalibrate. Remove the excess noise. So, turn off the news, step back from social media, give yourself 5 minutes without any kind of input. Step outside and just look at a tree or talk it out with a bird or something like that. It's surprising how quickly clarity comes back when you just stop absorbing the static stuff that has triggered you in the first place. Just step outside for 5 minutes. Or the equivalent of your outside. You may not be able to physically go out, but something equivalent to that just takes you into another calming realm just for a few moments. It will immediately help to restore clarity of the moment and reconnect with something very simple and real. So, cook yourself dinner or call a friend or sit under a tree or stare at a bird or whatever. The goal is not to feel better instantly. It's to feel something. Again, something real rather than this triggering moment, even if it's a beautiful warm breeze or something like that, or cool breeze, depending on where you are. And it can also help for you to do something that makes you feel like you again. So, if you're a painter, then paint. If you love gardening, then go out and garden. Or even yoga or stretching or whatever it is that you do. Get on your bike, whatever it is that makes you feel like the thing that makes you feel like you. Say something to yourself that helps to keep you grounded. Say something like, I can feel love without losing myself. I can care about someone or something without my world collapsing. I get to choose how open I want to be in this world. It's kind of an emotional re-entry in a way. It's not forcing optimism. What it's doing is it's kind of consciously reaffirming the power that you have. It's an empowerment type of tool, and you get to do it whenever you want, at your own pace, whenever you need it, with self-respect, and it puts you in the driver's seat. So when you're overwhelmed by something like division and fear and other people's emotional chaos, it's tempting to shut down. We sometimes stop caring, not because we don't want to care, but because caring feels really risky. It feels like a self-betrayal. There are people that you need to step away from, the people that are constantly dragging you into this chaotic kind of 3D existence. Well, sometimes you're better off without, but there are some perfectly wonderful, empowering individuals out there who are just as imperfect as you and me are. But they are doing their best, and they are attempting to transition, and they are worthy of love, even if they're not perfect. But when we have this sense of overwhelming, division and fear and everything else and all the chaos around us, it's really hard to get that sense of trust because we are afraid of becoming hurt. But here's the truth. Empathy doesn't mean merging into that person. And compassion doesn't mean giving yourself away. I am often described to be kind of an oxymoron type of individual because I'm often told that I am deeply compassionate, but I also have very strong boundaries. And so I don't allow myself to be swept away by my compassion. And I don't know, years of practice, I guess you could say. But most people are never taught how to stay emotionally open and grounded at the same time. And I'm one of, it's not something they teach in school. It's something you kind of have to learn through trial and error. Most of the time, we either collapse into other people's pain or we bolt the door in order to protect ourselves and protect us from our own pain. But there is a middle path. And that's the healthiest place to be. And it starts with a kind of a conscious understanding. So sometimes it's helpful to just sort of, if you sense that you're starting to shut down and close off, ask yourself whether you're judging, whether you're zoning out, whether you have a resentment against someone. Because often what that is, that's a sign that your empathy is being replaced by a defensive kind of emotion instead. And instead of asking what's wrong with that person, you might be able to just ask yourself, what are they afraid of that they are presenting something like this? It doesn't mean that you're excusing the harm that they might do towards others. Say, for example, there are people out there who are terrified of migrants, for example, and so they are actively acting in ways that appear to be really hateful, but it's not hate, it's fear. So instead of judging them as being and having this judgment of what you perceive to be their hate, which makes them kind of unlovable, the compassion is to look at what might be frightening them, because then there's room for love. If they're frightened, it's a whole different kind of scenario, isn't it? It's that kind of thing. It means you can you don't have to approve what they're doing, but you can relate to who they are when you demonstrate a need to understand more, not necessarily asking them, but even if it is just questioning what it might be to yourself, it creates an emotional clarity for you. And it's also really important to stay on your own side of the fence so you can really care deeply about someone and the issues that they're facing or the fear that is producing a response in them, but you don't have to jump the fence and rescue them. Especially if you're dealing with adults. You can understand without trying to fix it. You can offer support without abandoning your own needs. So, saying to someone, you have a drinking problem, I'm going to take you away and fix you, is probably not going to achieve anything. And that is your unconditional love. That's kind of a bit like codependency. Or you could say, you have a drinking problem. When you're ready to accept help, I'm here. And then walk away. And you've made it very clear that you love them, but they will have to want better. Can you see the difference? You're demonstrating your compassion, but you're also protecting yourself. Empathy becomes toxic when we confuse it with obligation, when we override that gut feeling that we have to make someone else comfortable. So if we're making someone else comfortable at our own detriment, then it's a toxic situation. Real compassion says something like, I see you, but I also see me. And I'm going to honor both of us, not just you, me as well. Can you see that? So sometimes what looks really healthy in a relationship or what looks really successful on the surface is actually a trap. And what looks defiant or difficult can be a sign of a deeper spiritual freedom. So there's this family dynamic, for example, which is called enmeshment. And this is where the parents, for example, consider the children to be extensions of their own validation. So this is where all kinds of things happen, even honor killings. So, you want your child to have a certain career because it makes you feel as though you've been a good parent, or you want them to marry a certain person because it makes you feel as though you are someone to be proud of. That's kind of this, it's almost like a narcissistic desire for your children to be an extension of you rather than their own individual person. And in this family dynamic, there are there are a number of different types of siblings that can arise in this situation, but there are two in particular that I think are relevant to today. One of them is the golden child. And the golden child is one of the children who is praised. They appear to be really responsible. They're often seen as emotionally, together. But behind the mask, they might be deeply enmeshed, where they're carrying the emotional burden of the family need to view them as an extension. So they will suppress their own truth in order to avoid rocking the boat. That's the golden child kind of thing. They're the ones that are the overachiever. They're always perfect because they want to make the parent happy, and the parent really is only happy when they're getting what they want out of their child. The rebel is another type of child that often comes out of an enmeshed family. And the rebel might be labeled as selfish or irresponsible or emotionally distant. But sometimes that rebellion is an act of emotional sovereignty. What it's saying is that child refuses to play the game. They refuse to play the role that others expect. They are demanding their own sovereignty and their own individuality. Even though the golden child appears to be the healthy one and the rebel appears to be the problem, the rebel, according to psychologists, is the healthiest of all of the children in that enmeshed family because the rebel has created boundaries and stuck to them, and they are maintaining their sovereignty. True healing and true love require you to step back and ask yourself something. And that question is, am I living from alignment to the frequency that's right for me, or am I living under some kind of weight of obligation? Enmeshment is not just a family issue though. It shows up in friendships, romantic relationships, even online communities. It's when we blur the boundaries between compassion and emotional fusion. We mistake closeness for identity. Being close to someone doesn't mean that you are enmeshed into their identity. You can still be an individual. We overfunction, we overfeel, we overcare, and we lose ourselves in the process. So a few little things to take away from that, and that is that emotional clarity doesn't mean that you're being cold. And healthy separation is not abandonment. So just because you are healthy and you're separating yourself from a person and maintaining your sovereignty doesn't mean that you're abandoning them. You can still love them, but you also love yourself in that way. And you can love someone and still say no. You can feel someone's pain without carrying that pain for yourself. These are 4 very important rules that help with the spiritual side of love. It's where spirituality matches up with psychological maturity. It's not about just opening your heart. It's about opening it really wisely and with discernment. That's how compassion becomes a force for empowerment, and not kind of this erasure of yourself and abandonment of yourself. So one of the most overlooked aspects of love and compassion is self-accountability. In psychology, self-responsibility is key to emotional regulation, boundary setting, and resilience. But in spiritual terms, it's about the foundation of conscious evolution. Taking ownership of your reactions is really empowering. You stop waiting for other people to change so that you can feel safer. Right? You can feel safe without them changing a thing. Boundaries become really sacred rather than defensive. You create space where love can flow without it being distorted by someone else. And you stop having to outsource your emotional well-being to things like relationships or institutions or ideologies. You are able to cope with your own emotional well-being this way by setting boundaries and taking care of yourself and allowing there to be a distance of protection where you're not enmeshed into someone else's pain and identity. It's kind of like a bit of energetic hygiene. So you care for your internal world so thoroughly that your external relationships become cleaner and clearer and more aligned. Instead of using empathy to abandon yourself, you use discernment to refine the connection that you have with other people. This invites transcendence because what it does is it shifts the focus from emotional entanglement in other people's chaos to a conscious kind of evolution of the individual. You're not trying to survive love. That's not the goal. The goal is to kind of learn how to master love so that it's working in your favor, so that it's making you stronger. So learning to love without losing yourself and learning to love without getting hurt isn't about shutting down. It's about kind of waking up. When you open your heart with intention and you feel deeply without collapsing or corroding yourself, and where you choose boundaries that are like acts of self-respect, what happens is you begin to experience connection from a place of clarity, not from a place of chaos. You no longer confuse empathy with enmeshment or compassion with self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is not love. You don't have to be tough in order to protect your heart. You just have to trust yourself to hold it open with clarity and courage and self-care. So if you are still listening to my voice, then welcome to the new world. This is the world that we are building together. My name is Ellie Dreams Down Under. Thank you for supporting this channel in all the ways that you do. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams.